Hello, my name is Jessica Stockdale and I'm currently a doctoral student and since the beginning of this year also a collaborator on a multidisciplinary grant jointly based at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School in the Department of Primary Care and Public Health and at the University of Sussex in the Department of Philosophy. So today what I'm going to be talking about is how recent scientific work and advocacy under the name of planetary health might not only transform the ways we collectively think about and respond to health concerns, but also open up new opportunities in the medical humanities in particular. So towards this end, I'm going to start by giving a brief overview of what the motivating ideas behind planetary health are, before explaining how these ideas may lead us to expand our notion of what counts as a health intervention, creating new opportunities for health-related activism. After this, I'm then going to move on to consider what specific opportunities could open up for the medical humanities as a result of planetary health, drawing from examples from my own work relating to teaching and action research. Okay, so first things first, what is planetary health? Well, planetary health is both a scientific field and social movement which is ultimately concerned with the threats that human-driven disruptions to Earth's natural systems pose to human health. Now, while the term has been used in the past to capture varying related ideas, planetary health, as I refer to it today, is a relatively new initiative which shares conceptual underpinnings with disciplines like One Health, eco-health, and to a certain extent, global health too. In terms of its origins, the foundational ideas of planetary health were first put forward by a 2014 comment piece in The Lancet, which was shortly followed by two further key events. The first being the publication of a full Lancet for Rockefeller Commission report in 2015, which delineated the scope of the field, while the second was the 2016 formation of the Rockefeller-funded Planetary Health Alliance, a coalition of over 200 institutions worldwide concerning the promotion of planetary health. So like most other socially mobilizing disciplinary fields, planetary health proceeds from a central premise which its proponents more or less agree on. The basic idea starts with the observation that we have now reached a point in time where humanities become the primary determinants of Earth's biophysical systems. In essence, what this means is that through activities including agriculture, industry, fishing, technological development, and energy consumption, for example, humans are now one of the primary drivers for environmental change, both at global and local levels. This includes changes like global warming, extreme weather events, ocean acidification, groundwater depletion, soil degradation, nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, habitat loss and biodiversity loss, just to name a few. Nevertheless, as planetary health moves on to point out, it is precisely because of these human-driven planetary disruptions that humanity now risks substantial health effects. In other words, what planetary health comes down to is the fact that by directly impacting Earth's natural systems, human activity should be recognised as driving an increase in global disease burden, which is affecting populations both now and in the future, as well as occurring across different dimensions of human health, like infectious disease, communicable disease, malnourishment, and mental health. So, to give you an idea how this might occur, let's consider the following case concerning human schistosomiasis and the links this disease has with human or anthropogenic-driven biodiversity loss. So, schistosomiasis is an infectious disease caused by parasitic flatworms, which occurs when humans enter fresh water where the free-swimming larval stage of the schistosoma flatworm is present. So as this diagram illustrates, the schistosoma life cycle usually starts with its eggs being shed into the water from the feces or urine of infected humans or other vertebrates. Those eggs then hatch into a second stage which will penetrate the body of an intermediate host, typically the freshwater snail. After developing in the snail, the schistosoma will then be released as a free-swimming larva, eventually entering a human host where it develops into an adult and causes schistosomiasis. If left untreated, schistosomiasis can be an incredibly painful condition, causing permanent damage to organs like the bladder, kidneys, and liver. So that's what schistosomiasis is. Now, how is it that anthropogenic environmental degradation contributes to increases in this particular disease burden? Well, as environmental scientists point out, in sub-Saharan Africa, where human schistosomiasis is endemic, human enterprises such as dam construction and overfishing have been linked to areas experiencing high levels of the disease. But what explains this link and why is it environmental? Well, as these scientists go on to highlight, both dams and overfishing lead to a reduction in the number of organisms which naturally predate on the parasite snail host. For instance, overfishing radically decreases the number of predatory fish in an area, and dams block the reproduction of the snail-eating migratory river prawn. With the loss of these predators and, by extension, biodiversity, the resultant increase in snail population can also lead to an increase in schistosoma larvae and so elevate risk of schistosomiasis in the relevant area. Now, you might be thinking at this point, yes, I can see how in certain areas anthropogenic ecological destruction can have an impact on schistosomiasis. But in the grand scheme of things, how much of a problem is this really? Well, unfortunately, the answer to this is that it really is quite a big problem. For instance, as one study has highlighted, a staggering 400 million people globally may now be at a higher risk of schistosomiasis as a result of the destructive impacts that dams alone have wrought on local areas. In addition to this, when we move away from schistosomiasis to look at infectious diseases in general, the picture doesn't seem to improve. For instance, as Lindell and Grace point out in this review, ecological degradation caused by human forces is overwhelmingly implicated in the associated burdens of infectious disease emergence globally. Okay, so from that example, you should now have a rough idea how anthropogenic planetary destruction can in fact impact human health, which, as I pointed out earlier, is the central premise behind the field of planetary health. Now, as some of you might have already recognised, there's something about the introduction of planetary health which could really expand the ways we think about health and its care at local, national and international levels. And the reason for this, I think, rests on two very crucial features. The first of these concerns the way that planetary health extends our understanding around disease causation in ways that are new and unexpected for many of us. Now, before I go straight into what this means, firstly, it's worth pointing out that planetary health's general point about the capacity of human activity to act as a disease driver is not itself original. In fact, long before planetary health, historic developments in the field of public health have taught us that the social arrangements and behaviours of a localised population will have a direct bearing on its health, whether that's a higher rate of lung cancer as a result of smoking habits, or a higher rate of malnourishment as a result of entrenched social inequality. However, while planetary health is not the first to point out that human activity can act as a disease driver, what makes its position novel is the fact that it highlights new ways in which such activity may be linked to health threats. So if public health has shown us that the social arrangements and behaviours of a localised population will have a direct bearing on its health, planetary health shows us that our social arrangements and behaviours can have an indirect bearing on our health as a result of changes to environmental systems which have not historically been regarded as pertinent in this way. So to really underscore this difference, as I said earlier, through public health, we've learned that social inequality is linked to malnourishment. Well, as recent work in planetary health has pointed out, malnourishment could also be driven by some very counterintuitive anthropogenic environmental factors. Specifically, most of you will already be aware that human energy consumption is leading to elevated atmospheric CO2 levels. But what you probably don't know is that such levels of CO2 could result in yields of key crops that may be bigger in terms of amount, but are ultimately lower in terms of nutrition. Now, this leads me to Planetary Health's second crucial feature relating to the awareness that it draws to the scale that these human-driven, environmentally mediated disease burdens may occur in the future. For instance, think about the low nutrition crop example I just spoke about. Given the capacity of atmospheric CO2 to spread around the planet, low nutrition crop yields could become a global problem, which has the capacity to increase risk of malnourishment worldwide if nations do not act to ameliorate it. This may not only cause malnourishment where it wasn't before, but it could also interact with other factors such as social inequality to make those who are already vulnerable more so. Okay, so after elaborating those two features, what I'm going to do now is briefly give you an idea about the potential that Planetary Health has for expanding our ideas around what constitutes the protection of health. And this, I think, will happen in at least two interconnected ways. Firstly, if we think about the human-driven, environmentally mediated dimensions of these health threats, we may find that in many cases, effective health response is going to require novel interventions that tackle either the environmental destruction itself and/or the human action which caused it. So, for instance, think back to the example of schistosomiasis earlier. I think many of us would be quite surprised if 5 years or so ago we were told that the reintroduction of prawns or the protection of fish could tackle infectious disease burdens in a particular area. However, I think it's worth pointing out that such interventions are already becoming a reality. For instance, Health in Harmony, who are an NGO based in the US, are engaging forest communities around the world to protect their homes from deforestation and the resultant health impacts it brings. Secondly, in addition to expanding our notion of what counts as a health intervention, we may find that the myriad ways in which human action can lead to environmentally mediated health threats will also create new opportunities for groups and individuals to help protect health. For instance, clinicians for Planetary Health are galvanizing health professionals, patients and communities around Planetary Health through lifestyle modifications and activism. So whether it's supermarkets increasing their selection of vegan foods, clinicians advocating for the control of air pollution, hikers acting against deforestation, governments establishing international environmental agreements, educators raising awareness in their courses, or even students campaigning about climate change, Planetary Health has the potential to open up new spaces where individuals and groups can leverage their unique positions for health-related activism. And this brings me to the final part of my talk, because among those who Planetary Health has the potential to create new spaces for is, of course, medical humanities scholars. Specifically, through things like teaching and research, I think it's really worth highlighting that humanities scholars are well placed to help bring about the kinds of changes that Planetary Health calls for. For instance, as Planetary Health recognises, teaching not only can raise awareness, but crucially, it can also equip the next generation of scholars and support the development of a community of practice. Likewise, research can be action-oriented, seeking to understand and act upon challenges which Planetary Health highlights. So to give you an example of how that could be achieved, I'm going to talk through a couple of examples from my own philosophical related teaching and action research. Okay, so to take teaching first, this year I was fortunate enough to be able to pilot some Planetary Health content on a few programs I run for the Brighton, Sussex Medical School. This includes one of my taught philosophical courses for first year medical students, and also one of the philosophical research projects I offer to fourth years who are undertaking a 6-month independent research course with me. Running this academic year, the general topic for both of these courses concerned the connections between Planetary Health and classic philosophical questions about intergenerational justice. As I alluded to a bit earlier, one of the things which Planetary Health really highlights is that if we neglect to do anything about global human activity now, then we do risk ceding serious health threats to generations in the future. Now, while the underlying pedagogical structure of both of these courses are of course different, one is research-based and the other is classroom-based. I've used Planetary Health on both of these courses in broadly the same way. Firstly, in introducing a philosophical subject that is likely to be very unfamiliar to most students, I found that Planetary Health's main message gives a nice contemporary framing to the question of whether we have moral obligations to those who are currently unborn. Since most students are going to jump to the conclusion that we obviously have moral duties from harm, this year I explored the topic through Derek Parfit's version of the non-identity problem, which challenges students to establish firmer critical foundations for their conclusions. Moving on, assuming that we do have moral obligations to future generations, as part of both courses, students also get the chance to apply what they've learnt about planetary health so as to consider what these moral obligations might require in practice. These discussions are explored using Joseph Heath's version of the Just Savings framework, which prompts students to think about ameliorative action and the connections that this has to issues of global inequality and inequity. So just to quickly mention, if you are interested in integrating planetary health into your humanities teaching, I really recommend you have a read about the cross-cutting principles of planetary health education, which was published in the Lancet Planetary Health in 2018. This gives a nice overview of the core messages that planetary health seeks to impart, several of which have key connections to the humanities, including inequality and inequity, global citizenship, and global values. Okay, so moving on from teaching, I now want to briefly talk about research. So earlier this year, I co-wrote a collaborative humanities-based scoping grant, which was successfully funded by the Sussex Sustainability Research Programme and involves colleagues from the University of Sussex, Brighton and Sussex Medical School, the University of Papua New Guinea, and the New Guinea Bintang Research Centre. Now, as some of you might already know, Papua New Guinea, or PNG, is an independent state located in the South Pacific, just north of Australia, which possesses one of the richest natural environments in the world. This includes part of the third largest rainforest globally, 5% of the world's animal and plant species, as well as some of the most biodiverse coral reefs in the Coral Triangle. Unfortunately, however, in the last few decades, these natural systems have increasingly come under threat from extractive activities such as logging and mining, which also has an impact on the health of those clan-based communities who call PNG's biodiverse forests home. Such a situation has, of course, generated an imperative to protect PNG's forests in order to preserve this globally important environment and, by extension, also promote the health of PNG's forest clans. Towards these ends, over the last 23 years, the University of Sussex has been working with partners at the New Guinea Bintang Research Centre in Madang on scientific community-led conservation work in the area. As part of this scoping project, our aim is to expand this work to include the arts and humanities, which can make a valuable contribution to conservation by helping to enlarge knowledge around the human dimensions of environmental challenges and also act as a vehicle for interventions. Consequently, with a view to achieving this in the long term, we've partnered with humanities-based scholars at the University of PNG to conduct a landscape review mapping arts and humanities capacity in PNG, with a special focus on research and teaching that can contribute to conservation. This is involving a series of 4 iterative online-based workshops that comprise a blend of structured discussion and collaborator-led presentations. The intended outputs of this project is firstly a publication reporting on the state of the arts and humanities in PNG, and secondly a collaborative humanities-based grant application pertaining to scholarly work around conservation. Now, unfortunately, we're only about 2 months on this project, so I can't report anything concrete just yet. But if you're interested in doing something similar, please feel free to reach out to me over Twitter or email, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it. You don't have to do something so far afield as in PNG. There's tons of opportunities closer to home here in Ireland or in the UK to help protect nature and human health. So I just want to close by saying thank you to those who have funded this work, including Chase, the Consortium for the Humanities and the Arts South East England, which is an AHRC funded doctoral training partnership, and SSRP, the Sussex Sustainability Research Programme at the University of Sussex. Thank you very much for listening.